Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. Thank you for, if everybody wants us to stand up and stretch your legs for a little bit, that'd be a good time. I don't have an introductory slide for Dr. Otto. So, Dr. Otto, please come up. Dr. Otto is visiting us from Liechtenstein. Anybody knows where Liechtenstein is? Yeah, right. It's the largest, it's the biggest influence, small country, but big country in Europe. Dr. Otto has extensive experience. I'll just speak about what I do know about you, and maybe you can give an introduction that's better than mine. Dr. Otto is leading the transportation sector for Liechtenstein. He's the equivalent of, let's say, I don't know, would you be almost like if you'd be the head of the Department of Transportation in the U.S., but in Liechtenstein. And he's done amazing work so far. Before that, he was at Volvo for a couple decades. And more importantly, and I would say this is a challenge to anybody else that's in the Department of Transportation, in the back of his Florida Liechtenstein license, he has the ability to drive just about any truck, from car to, I didn't see motorcycle back there. Okay, motorcycle, buses, including Harleys, and heavy duty trucks, which I think most maybe DOT people, I don't know if they could actually make that claim. So this is definitely the boss for a reason. Dr. Otto.
Thanks very much. First and foremost, Otto is okay. In Liechtenstein, we are all saying just the name, so that's great. Thanks much.
All right. So we need a little bit of a clicker to move through the presentation. Is that this? Oh, you'll just do one manually? Okay, all right. Because we'll need some of them maybe for the Otto's presentation. Let's go back one slide. All right, so as today's topic is mentioned, it's about resilient infrastructure. As you guys may or may not know, digitization of infrastructure is absolutely critical for a lot of different reasons. Number one, to put things in perspective, if you can have a 1% improvement in your infrastructure, then that could be pretty meaningful. In dollar terms, to put things in perspective, on a small scale, Miami-Dade County, for example, between the airport and the seaport, is a $100 billion economy that flows through, right? So if you think about us in a mini GDP, a 1% improvement on 100 billion probably be $1 billion improvement, right? I.e. a community unicorn, a communicorn. Now imagine this across the country. You guys like that, communicorn? I got that from my friend Matthew. So putting that in perspective, right? Transportation and logistics is also something that we know is essential for everything from food security to emergency transportation to logistics like we just experienced during the pandemic, right? This is a cluster of a lot of the logistics hubs across the world. A lot of our conversation tends to be a little bit US-centric, so it's exciting to have Otto here to help expand the perspective of the limitations that we've experienced in the US, as well as the things that are working and being implemented well in Europe, and maybe some takeaways that other markets, as well as we can have to take away. So to make the most of the presentation, I think the structure for today's panel is, if we can get to the next slide, is to talk about things that we've tried in the US, right? There is no smart infrastructure in the US yet. We don't have any smart ports in the US yet. There are smart ports in Dubai, in China, in France, in the Netherlands, right? I mean, basically in a lot of other markets except here. So this is an example of something that all the different stakeholders that were required to pull this off in a place like Miami-Dade, right? Don't even bother with this. This slide's a bit older. This is pre-pandemic in a public-private partnership, echoing the words of the former panel, that we were seeking to establish. But during the pandemic, all of that got paused, even though we needed it the most. Next slide. To do that, we figured, well, we need a way of sharing data, an interoperability framework that allows us to share data with the different players. And again, even though we had everybody around the table, it still didn't get done. We need an extra oomph and an extra push. So, Dr. Otto, I guess this is your time to shine. If you can maybe move on to Otto's presentation, he could explain to us a little bit about how he was actually able to get it done, and then maybe that'll help us understand on some takeaways that we can have for the local market. Next slide.
Oh, the clicker works for Otto.
Thanks very much. I take this for
All
a
right,
moment. Thanks very much. First and foremost, also a warm welcome from my side. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here in the US. And you know, there is a saying and a beautiful song. It's called "The Best for the Last." So we are pretty last, but we are not going only to be the best. Let's be a bit humble. we want to be different. Different in terms of bringing another perspective. We had a gentleman here from India. I've traveled 7,000 kilometers to come to the US and to bring a bit the European perspective. And I would like to start with one point here about European perspective before I enter into the current situation. For me, we have heard a lot about trust. Trust, trust, trust. We have heard a lot about blockchain technology and technology and technology. And we have also heard about a lot of how can we make this happen. I would say, and also that blockchain is cryptocurrency. For me, I want to start with one statement. For me, blockchain is not equal to cryptocurrency. Blockchain is something much, much more. Blockchain is about, first and foremost, transferring value, full stop. We could add in a real trustful environment. Well, to get there, and I will come to the point of the introduction for where we are and what we develop, but I entered from my side with my passion to this digital ecosystem, understanding the possibility of blockchain as such, as an enabler. I would call it as a strategic enabler. And what we want to do and why we entered is Liechtenstein has a dedicated blockchain law based on that you can conduct business under legal certainty. And that is for me, being a government official, on the one hand, what we have in our hands as government officials, and government is trust. People trust, at least in many, many places of the world, in government, because what we do is you know, it's serious stuff. If you can't trust in government, who can you trust? So trust is very, very important. And that is one of the reasons why the blockchain law and the regulation is so important to have as a start. Okay, now I would like to share a journey we have heard a lot about private-public partnership. And Liechtenstein has joined forces with Swiss colleagues on a private-public partnership, which I would like to show you very quickly. We all know when you go to buy a car, and I don't want to go in details, you have to run through a whole life cycle. Life cycle in the sense of sometimes it's broken up and whatever, but there is, in the life cycle, there is a manufacturer, there is an importer, depending on the stage, there is dealer, there is insurance, road traffic authority, which is, for instance, us, workshop, buyer and seller, and also, as you can see at the end of the day of the life cycle, a scrap merchant. So there are a lot of let's call it, interactions in between. And in the end of the day, if you look at today's system and the current situation, we have a mess. Because there is a lot of friction among actors, and there is a lot of bad data quality in the system. So what did we do? Not the National Road Office of Liechtenstein solved this problem. We got in a private-public partnership with 28 other players, such as a BMW or a Porsche or a Volkswagen or insurance companies, other traffic authorities, and so on and so forth, dealerships who wanted to join this ecosystem which we developed together and are still developing in the sense of how we are doing it. We built a core system, and this is it in terms of we built a permissioned blockchain with the DLT ledger technology. So it's a public-private, let's call it ledger, permission system. And what you can see, and what is very important, having all these players in the ecosystem, and we can say this is a proof of authority. So you just don't get in and you are in this blockchain system. You have to be let in. If you buy, for instance, a car or whatever, you will be authorized to get on the thing. So two issues here, two of the learning. We have heard a lot about identity. Liechtenstein has a digital identity from the state. So I have, for instance, a digital identity where I have a digital driver license as an example. But this digital identity helps us to get on this into the blockchain space. If you don't have a digital identity, my Swiss colleagues use SSI, which you have heard. Now, you just don't get on to say, I bought this car and I'm in, and I want to make a very, very important point here in terms of really the success and really of the trust. For me, managing a blockchain is, as I said, about trust. If I want to have trust, or if we want to have trust, we go through here the process of KYC, you know your customer, AML, anti-money laundering issues. We go through a corporate governance process which has a code of conduct before one gets into this chain, so that we can ensure that is really trust. It's trustful when I buy a car, when I sell a car, and this is what it makes the difference of the whole thing. So there is a single point of truth in the system. There are smart contracts, of course, and you have, through automated processes, you have built trust into the system, how we conduct business. And when you buy a car or you sell a car, you are sure you are not getting a lemon car, okay? And if you would get one, there is a blockchain law which you can take action to it. So this is very quickly, Silvio, a quick overview of what we have been doing.
And I mean, talking about that, Dr. Otto, could you mention a little bit of, and I know the mic's there, but okay, there you go, thanks. On this slide, one of the things that's really important is, okay, how do you make sure, and you mentioned a little bit to this, what is the blockchain that you're using? Why did you choose that blockchain to make the decision on what's happening? And by the way, guys, the key word is permissioned blockchain, right? So unlike Ethereum or Bitcoin network type, Lightning Network type solutions, this is really permission based, right? Meaning that you can't really opt into this without being allowed to. Dr. Otto?
Yes. So what we are utilizing as basic technology is Corda R3, it's called. It's a good, let's say, it's not hyperledger, it's another philosophy, because you can share authority in a very good way. That's the one thing. But what we have built is, so to speak, a core where there is a secure blockchain for business, where all the actors has the general, let's call it, core principles of the database structure as such, because we have to operate within a structure. But what we then do, each individual member, so this is called common good, because we operate in a digital commons. And if you know Elinor Ostrom, 1990, she won the Nobel Prize for governing the commons. So we are actually doing that. All the members, the 28 currently, contribute to the digital commons, that we have a system. And on top of that, every actor in the blockchain, in the ecosystem, as you see here, he can create an app and connect it to this core system.
And here in this, we're talking about 360 life cycle management. How does this relate to, when we're talking about transportation, could you extrapolate not just the life cycle of the car, but what about the fleet, the buses, the trucks, the waste management, talking about the commons, maybe your boats, maybe the airplanes, if you guys have any airplanes, the trains. Does this apply to other types of other multimodal systems?
Actually, we could do it, but it has not been, for the moment, we are utilizing it for vehicles only. But we could do it, like you say, you could do it for all the other goods as well. It's what I call asset management at the end of the day. So yes, is the answer. You could scale it.
Could you talk about the other issues, or maybe, how this could be extrapolated further? What's the future of this? You mentioned something about the digital commons. Does anybody here know, just from economics, the tragedy of the commons? Have you guys heard of the tragedy of the commons before? Or the commons in general, one hand. So the commons is basically, it doesn't mean that, let's say we're all here, right? And we all sort of like are nomads and we show up and there's a lake in the middle, right? That lake maybe doesn't belong to me, doesn't belong to Otto, doesn't belong to Gerard, doesn't really belong to all of us, but all of us maybe start taking water out and taking water out and taking water out and lugging it over. And no one's really saying, well, it's not my lake and it's not his lake, so who's going to tell us something about, you know, the implications of our actions on that lake, this common asset, right? Now, these commons, this issue of the commons is huge obstacle. And one of the things that we're facing here in the US, and actually one of the issues of collaboration, especially with the other implications which we'll get into, which is the consequences of our action or of our inaction. Typically, in the US, for example, the federal government regulates things that are, let's say, in the a certain amount of miles offshore. Then is the state governs other things that are a little bit closer to the shore. Then it's maybe the city or the county, depending on where you're at. Or maybe it's a federal agency like the Environmental Protection Agency, which just got its legs kicked out from under it. That's a whole other conversation. But then you had the Environmental Protection Agency, for example. Now, these groups are meant to try to protect the commons, the ocean, the lake, the forests, the mangroves, the parks, right? These sort of natural capital assets that belong to everybody. Now, Dr. Otto's mentioning a digital commons. Not just do we contribute to the physical commons, which we'll get into, but the digital commons. What was that like, getting the stakeholders together and the concept of a digital commons and the policy of a digital commons? Could it be applied to physical goods as well, or what was that process like to just get everybody on the same page for the commons?
You explained the commons, you know, and the strategy of the commons and the commons per se really well. Thanks very much for that. And also, of course, your question, I can answer yes. It functions. It is okay, but you need some principles. It's like you described. If you take only water out of the lake, it comes a point there is no water. So the guys in our ecosystem and the members of this association, it's a consortium, which is a non-profit, by the way, we committed whoever gets into the consortium, he has to adhere to the digital commons approach. And that means they have every member has to contribute with its share to the digital commons of the basis of the structure. And that is one of the guiding principles to make this happen. And of course, and I come back to your point, you know, this is a kind of a polycentric organization. It's co-creating, it's evolving, it's all the things which are cool to have to be successful of the future. But I think here one of the most important issues is that everybody cares for each other. And we have developed, so to speak, a distributed mindset culture. And I think to make it happen, this digital common, you need to have this digital mindset culture. Like, for instance, if Audi or Volkswagen or Volvo is talking to each other in these digital commons, they have to have the mindset that we share and we want to do this for the good, that the whole vehicle life cycle management works well.
And I know we have only a few minutes left. I don't know if we could request an extra 5 minutes just to get into how we make the sausage here, which I think is really key. So everybody has a takeaway on a playbook that was really key. Could you talk about when people had to contribute something to the commons or the digital commons or agree on this? How did you operationalize talking to every stakeholder to get them to agree to a public-private partnership?
Actually, process it's a process of evolving at the end of the day. So you have the basic business idea. We started as about 6, 7 companies, and then it really evolved and grew. But what we did is actually, when you say what was the process, we showed the code of conduct, we show what are our objectives, and we gathered within 1 year from about 8 players, 8 actors, we got up to 20 within 1 year, because a lot of companies, and I talk businesses, I'm not talking now government, they understood the value. If we conduct a business in the ecosystem, for instance, if an insurance is in, or 2 or 3 or 4, or a financial institution, financial services, they can all profit in these digital commons. So we really proved that the investment for one company and for the time and for the experience, it would be much too high, especially for us as a small country, as an example, but for many other as well. So the point here was, it really, here it's not 1 and 1 makes 2, 1 and 1 makes maybe 10.
Right, synergies of that. That's a great argument, and it's something for everybody to consider, both on the public side in terms of investing their limited resources as well on the private side. Now, what about the future? What are challenges that you see in the future or opportunities for the future of reapplying this technology? Could you talk about sustainability or the path towards net zero? And I mean, we know at least in places like Miami-Dade, transportation consists of more than 50% of all the greenhouse gas emissions. Can you touch on this?
I think, and this is a slide for that, and you are spot on. One of the biggest challenges for this decade and the decades to come is actually decarbonization and also, of course, the climate change and what does it bring with it. And to say here a word, of course, we have to move towards e-mobility. Fossil is definitely out to save the climate. We have to move to biofuels and alternative fuels, and of course, especially e-mobility. E-mobility can also be hydrogen and things to come, so which needs to be considered. And for this, I think we need to have an e-mobility concept, and we are running out of time here, but we have some thoughts as well to have an e-mobility concept and a circular mindset and ecosystem where we can bring, let's call it, CO2 and CO2 footprint down to earth and show, you know, what makes sense when you take the distance per mile, when you drive a kilometer or a mile with your car, then it's about really to have what we call a true and fair pricing approach and an integrated approach. But that is a bit where it goes to, and maybe finally, of course, and I know that is one of your favorite, it's the vehicle, the car-to-car was the technology.
Go to the last image, the V2G.
And we have, of course, one of the great things is what is underway is the V2X. Car stands for, C stands for communication, and V for vehicle, and 2 for two, and X to everything. So I think this is really about for the future of shared economy, for the future of CO2 footprint, for the future that we are getting to a better planet and more sustainable, how we utilize mobility.
And just to wrap up so we can get off here and open up the space, what's a call to action? How can people like myself or folks in the audience contribute our part in our community to making this a reality for public-private partnership, for decarbonization, for smart mobility? What word of advice or what calls to action would you make to the crowd?
Well, I would say, I have now met you for 2 days. I would start to clone you because you have a passion which is unbelievable and a speed too, for really to make this happen. But I think what we need is passionate people, passionate, responsible political leadership too, and many ambassadors. You all here are ambassadors, can be ambassadors, when you walk out to make a change and say, look, yes, we have some solutions and we want to create a better world.
So you hear it. If anybody here is open to collaborating on a pilot where we can finally, in the US, contribute to some kind of smart mobility, smart infrastructure, please raise your hand. Talk to us after this. We'd love to integrate, love to collaborate, and get this done. We'll be in the back of the room. Dr. Otto, thank you for visiting us. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. And the GBA, thanks for hosting.
Great pleasure.
Good work.